right, starting with Mike 2, first question.
Hi, Ministers. Chris Rand, CBC. My first question is for Minister Miller, and then my second question will be for Mr. Vandal. Mr. Miller, you are going to be dealing directly with residential school survivors from St. Anne's. Will you meet with these survivors to discuss a settlement? Will you open all databases, including the Indian Register, to track the children who never came home? And you're taking over an office that's being described as toxic. How do you plan to make changes?
How much time do I have to answer that question?
We have 10 minutes, I'm told.
They didn't ask me to rag the puck, but these are very important questions, and I'll absolutely meet with survivors. I spent a good chunk of the summer visiting residential schools, meeting with elders and visiting sites. Every site is different, and each has a unique, horrifying story to it. It's important to note in the St. Anne's context that the vast majority of survivors have received compensation to the extent monetary compensation can replace harm past and the horrific harm that occurred. There are a number of nuances with respect to the information. Those are ones that are being reviewed judicially. If there's more to uncover, I'm glad to get under that and start working on it. The issue with respect to who holds files, evidence that needs to be preserved and, if appropriate, disclosed to the public. And let's not shy away from the fact that these are horrifying accounts of schools that were, of institutions, of labor camps that were designed to rid the Indigenousness of people, but they do document some horrifying incidents. So there are privacy concerns, and we should not shy away from being quite open about that fact. If there isn't anything that the federal government is holding, I'm willing to work with my department to get to the bottom of that. I'm sure Minister Haidu will say exactly the same thing. This is making sure that we continue on the path and getting more clarity and closure for survivors, some of whom continue to courageously speak out, and frankly, some of whom continue to suffer in silence. These are not uncomplex matters, but they are matters that we need to get to the bottom of it for the sake of who we are as a country, but also foremost for the sake of those who are still suffering. As regards the department, I've spent the last 2 years as a minister, most of which is during a pandemic, working with a team pretty much around the clock. That when you look at the entirety of the civil service that has supported Indigenous Services Canada, one that has historically had a bad reputation. There are instances, like many other institutions, where there is systemic racism. I've gotten a tremendous amount of guidance from my staff that is Indigenous. A good chunk of it has guided me along this path and saved my skin a number of times. And I prize that feedback that I get. Workplaces can get toxic, particularly with respect to issues that are very, very painful. There's a lot of people that are Indigenous that go to work at Indigenous Services Canada or at Crown Indigenous Relations, and are looked at differently by members of their community, but they're doing that to change the reality of their people that has far too long been denied and treated miserably. So that workplace and understanding that the civil service is independent and needs to be treated as such as a matter of good governance, these are things that we have to work with our deputy ministers, whether it's Deputy Minister Quan Watson or Deputy Minister Fox. It's something that they are laser focused on because they know it is a problem and they need to rid it from all parts of the civil service, but particularly in those ones that are the emblems of reconciliation.
Appreciate that detailed answer. Thanks very much. Mr. Vandal, this question's from CBC Iqaluit. The City of Iqaluit recently submitted an application to the Government of Canada to fix its ongoing water issues and sustain its water supply for the future. The price tag is about $180 million, and just wondering if you've received that, would move forward with that, and are you aware that there are water issues in Grise Fiord and many other communities throughout the territory?
Yes, first of all, I've had conversations with the City of Iqaluit on my visits pre-COVID about a new water source for the city. I know we are fully seized with the issue. The Canadian Armed Forces is there now to do all things possible to help. I've approved a temporary water license as of about 10 days ago to draw water from a local river, and I know we are communicating directly with the government of Nunavut and the City of Iqaluit on that issue. A long-term solution is infrastructure-based. We have Canada's largest infrastructure program in history, and I'm looking forward to working with the city, the territory, and the infrastructure minister to arrive at a long-term solution.
Mike 1.
Hi there, Mackenzie Greer from CTV. Ms. Freeland, my first question is for you. Your government has racked up a decent amount of spending during the pandemic, and there's a number of large programs that your government looked to bring forward in this mandate. Is there any consideration to raising revenue by either increasing the GST or increasing income tax for regular Canadians?
Thanks for the question. Nice to see you. And let me just start by pointing out that we are very mindful, and we're mindful from the outset of the pandemic, that this was an extraordinary situation. It was a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. It provoked the greatest depression since the Great Depression in Canada. And we understood, the Prime Minister understood from the outset, that that crisis required extraordinary government action. And I am really glad that we put in place the support which we put in place for individual Canadians, for Canadian businesses, and also that we went out and aggressively bought vaccines. We are, though, very much aware, and we were aware from the beginning of the pandemic, that our emergency support programs were precisely that, emergency support programs. And as we are finishing the fight against COVID and winning the fight against COVID, we understood from the beginning that that would be the moment when we would pivot to a new, and I really hope and believe, final stage of support. And that's what the Prime Minister and I announced last week. And part of what we're doing is understanding that we need to be thoughtful and careful about managing government finances. During the campaign, we put forward a carefully costed program. We put forward detailed 5-year spending plans. In those plans, we showed a continued decline in the debt to GDP ratio. And we did put forward some specific plans to raise additional revenue. Those plans did not include what you just alluded to.
My second question is for Minister Guilbeault. Thank you, Ms. Freeland, for that answer. Mr. Guilbeault, you've been a long-time climate activist, and I'm sure you're very excited to be Environment Minister. Do you think the government needs to change their plans in any way to make sure that Canada meets their Paris and other emissions targets?
Thank you very much for the question. As you've seen from our platforms, and as we've heard, all of us throughout this last campaign, many Canadians recognize that our government has been doing a lot more in the fight against climate change than any other government before. But they're also telling us we need to do more. They want us to do more. They want us to go faster, and we need to do that by working together all across the country. Climate change affects us all from coast to coast to coast, and we've seen last summer, certainly in Canada, but not just in Canada, how the impacts of climate change are becoming more and more important as years go by. So we've made a number of ambitious new commitments in our platform, namely to cap emissions from oil and gas sector at current level and then diminishing over time so that we reach net zero by 2050, and also to phase out 2 years before our G20 country partners fossil fuel subsidies. So the G20 commitment is to phase them out by 2025. We've committed to do that by 2023. So we will be continuing and accelerating in the fight against climate change. Thank you.
Mike 2, last question.
Hi, my question and follow-up are for Minister Mark Miller. My first question is, you're entering a department where a lot of files have been languishing for some time. You're going to be dealing with a lack of trust among First Nations, treaty rights, self-government agreements, land claims, lawsuits, specific claims. The list kind of goes on. So I'd like to ask you, what is your #1 priority going into that department?
Well, I think unfortunately I don't have the luxury of having just one priority. I think you named ones that are key to the relationship that has been broken since before Canada existed. This relationship started with land. The relationship has been broken because of land theft, and it's time to give land back, and that's just the reality of it. it's easily said. It's more difficultly done. In the last 2 years of my time as a minister, as I mentioned earlier, it's been during a global pandemic where my #1 priority was to keep people and work with communities to keep people safe and alive. The #1 impediment to that wasn't resources, it was trust. And I hope, and I think I'm being probably mildly optimistic, but I think we've built a measure of trust that I think I could take into this department and start moving quickly on things that, one, shouldn't have happened in the first place, and in order to fix them, need to move a whole heck of a lot quicker. Before, when I was Parliamentary Secretary to Minister Bennett, we settled a land claim in BC that arose during the Depression, and it was the Indian agent that basically stole some trees for a few $1,000s. The claim lasted 100 years. These things can't take 100 years to fix. It cost $500,000 to fix it and to restitute it to the families. It should never happen in the first place. It's a pretty clear and cut case. So there are a lot of things that can be fixed easily. There's a lot more difficult ones that we need to move forward on, whether it's Wet'suwet'en rights, which should have been clear cut from a court decision 20 years ago, or others on this in this neck of the woods. They are not uncomplex. They do cost money. But the first thing to do is to start building that trust and to start speaking with people, getting our negotiators back at the negotiating table and talking with good minds. And that is first and foremost lands, but includes a lot of other specific claims that I'm eager to move forward, but needs the support of all Canadians to make sure that moves forward and how we see our country going into the future.
For that answer, as a follow-up, what do you make of Minister Bennett being shuffled out of that role after 6 years, and how is your approach going to differ from your predecessors?
Well, I think you'll have to draw your own conclusion as to how that differs. I wouldn't be the person I am today without the support and encouragement of Minister Bennett. She has, my first position as a minister was Minister of Indigenous Services in the beginning of a global pandemic. And so I've leaned on her a lot, and she's selflessly offered her time, support, encouragement, and she's pushed me at times to be better. Some of the work that we've done in and around making sure that we recognize Joyce's principle, for example, while it fell within my department to push it and to put out a number of summits with stakeholders to change something about how the healthcare system treats Indigenous peoples, was because she pushed our department, pushed us, and we pushed ourselves. Again, I'm coming out of this as having worked with a team pretty much around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think they've proven their mettle, and hopefully we can take some of that momentum into the next job.
My apologies. We'll take one last question, one follow-up for French, please.
Sure. Dylan Robertson, Winnipeg Free Press, for Minister Vandal. Congrats on your reappointment. But I do have to ask, this is the first time in decades that Manitoba hasn't had anyone on the front bench. I'm wondering how come neither you nor your colleagues in Manitoba or Alberta have a senior cabinet role here? And does this not send a message that the prairies don't matter to this government?
I think nothing can be further from the truth. First of all, I'm very proud of our Manitoba caucus, all 4 of us. I'm proud to come back as Minister of Northern Affairs with the added responsibility of CanNor, the economic development arm for the North and the Arctic. And I'm also very proud to be the Minister for the economic development strategy for the prairies. And I think for the first time, the economic development strategy for the prairies, which we've worked a long time to achieve, is going to be centered in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Oui, Marco Belair-Cirneau du Devoir. Ma question s'adresse au nouveau ministre de l'Environnement et contre le changement climatique.
And climate change. Mr.
Guilbeault, d'un écologiste qui a milité pour Greenpeace,
you have the reputation of being an activist that worked for Greenpeace. There's certainly a lot of expectations placed on you right now. Are you going to have to disappoint people
l'histoire nous le
despite your
dira.
best intentions?
Je pense que
Answer.
mon
Well,
rôle
time
et
will
notre
show.
rôle en tant que
Our
gouvernement,
role
c'est
as
de
the
faire tout
government
ce
and
qu'on
my
peut
role
pour
as well
accélérer
is to do
la
everything
lutte au
we
changement
can
climatique,
to
pour
increase the
accélérer
fight
ou
against
freiner,
climate
si vous
change,
préférez,
or
la
to slow
disparition
down climate change,
des
to
espaces
stop
verts
the
et les
disappearance of
menaces qui
green
pèsent
spaces,
sur nos
and
espaces
to fight
naturels
the
et sur
threats
les
against
espèces
our
menacées. Je
natural
pense que
environment
le défi des
and
changements climatiques et celui de la perte de la
endangered
biodiversité
species.
sont les deux grandes crises environnementales
I
qui sont
believe
devant nous.
these
Nous
are
avons une
two crises
plateforme,
that are
nous avons fait
before
déjà
us.
beaucoup de choses. Le Fonds monétaire international,
We've
par
already
exemple,
done a lot.
reconnaît que le
The
système
International Monetary Fund, for
tarification du carbone
example,
canadien est l'un des meilleurs
has said that
et que si l'ensemble des pays du G20 mettaient en
Canadian
place
carbon
ce
tax
pays-là,
is one
nous
of the
serions à
best.
2/3 de l'atteinte des objectifs de Paris, par
And
exemple. Donc, nous avons
we're
déjà
very
fait
close
beaucoup de
to
choses. Nous
reaching
avons pris des
our
engagements ambitieux dans la dernière plateforme. Notre
objectives.
plateforme a été saluée
Our
par un
last
ensemble
platform was
d'experts
very
d'un bout à
ambitious.
l'autre
It has
du
been
pays, dont
hailed by
plusieurs
experts
collaborateurs du
across the
GIEC.
country,
Mais je pense
including
que je suis en
several
mesure de vous dire quel
experts
sera
from the
le bilan.
IPCC, people
Et je
who
pense que
work
nous
with
allons
them.
faire, en tant
I
que
hope that
gouvernement,
what
tout ce
we're
qui est en
going to be
notre
able to
pouvoir
do
pour accélérer
we will be
la
doing
mise en
everything
place
we
de ces
can,
mesures
rather,
pour
as a
faire
government
du
to
Canada un
implement
pays,
these measures
un des
and
meilleurs
make
pays au monde
Canada
dans le cadre
one
de
of
la
the
lutte au
best
changement
countries in the
climatique et la
world
protection
when
de
it
la
comes to
biodiversité.
fighting climate
Merci
change and
beaucoup.
protecting
C'est tout le temps qu'on a
biodiversity.
pour le groupe
That's
un.
all the
Vous pouvez
time we
maintenant
have for
ramener-
Group
on va
A.
ramener le groupe 2. Merci.
You can bring in Group 2. Thank you.
Second group up. Heads up, guys. Second group here. Yep. Merci. On va maintenant commencer avec les premières questions.
Thank
Micro 1.
you. We'll start for the first
Oui,
question.
ma question s'adresse
My question
à la ministre Petitpas
is for
Taylor.
Minister Petitpas-Taylor.
Bonjour, Madame la ministre.
Hello, Madam
Je me
Minister.
demandais, est-ce que votre réforme de la loi sur les langues officielles
Will
allait
your
être un
reform of the
copier-coller
Official
de celle de
Languages
votre
Act
prédécesseur, Mélanie
be
Joly?
a cut and
Et
paste of your
appuyez-vous
predecessors,
le projet de loi
Ms. Joly?
96
And
du
do you
gouvernement du
support
Québec qui est débattu
Bill
présentement à l'Assemblée nationale?
96, currently
Merci
being
beaucoup pour
debated
la
in the
question.
Quebec
Premièrement,
National
c'est un
Assembly?
énorme honneur pour moi d'avoir
Thank you
été
very much
appelée
for
la
your
ministre
question.
des langues officielles,
It's very,
ainsi
a very
que pour
fine honor
l'Agence
for me to be
du développement
able to
économique
call myself
de
the
l'APECA.
Minister of
C'est sûr
Official
qu'aujourd'hui, ma
Languages
première
and Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. My first job will be to meet the deputy ministers to be filled in. And our revised bill will be, of the Official Languages Act, will be our first priority.
Anna Kokula with the Wire Report. I have a question for Minister Rodriguez. I was just wondering, will you keep in the social media obligations the previous Heritage Committee put in place for sites like YouTube, or will you exempt social media from the upcoming revised Broadcasting Act, or will you put more harsh restrictions on for social media?
Well, you're talking about the Broadcasting Act, which is a very, very important bill. I had the chance to work on this file before. And as you know, we made many promises to table important bills in the 101st days, and that includes the broadcasting bill. And we need that bill. We have to modernize it. It's been there. It predates the internet, so we have to modernize it. We have to make sure that whoever benefits from the system, whoever participates in our system will contribute to our system. But at the same time, we also know that freedom of expression is a pillar of our democracy in our country, so we'll be working with that.
time for you to draft the bill, will you be keeping or removing the previous social media obligations that were in the last one?
What I'm saying is that what we're basing on ourselves on is exactly those pillars, which are supporting our artists, our creators, making sure that everybody has the same rules, that those web giants contribute to our culture. That's absolutely fundamental. But again, freedom of expression is also essential. So we'll be working with those parameters.
Merci. Micro 1.
Thank you very much. A question for the Devoir, for Mr. Rodriguez. You said that in the first 100 days of your government, there will be important projects, for example, with regard to hate speech. 100 days is not a lot of time. I'm wondering if there's something that would make you say that the Conservatives will be less likely to block your projects. Why did projects not necessarily go forward in the last session? Answer. I hope that there will be less filibustering and blocking. We're coming out of an election. This government has received a clear mandate, and we were very clear about the projects and the bills that we'd be doing in the first 100 days. For example, renewing the Broadcasting Act that dates to before the internet. It must absolutely be modernized. I'm counting on my colleagues from the other parties. We've established very good relations. I was already Minister of Heritage. I was a leader of the government in the past, and I have good relations with the other parties and their leaders. I hope we'll reach a space where we will be able to benefit our creators and our artists, a fair playing field where the web giants will have to contribute. If you take part in the system, then you have to contribute. My next question is for Ms. Anand. Question, with regard to defense, Ms. Anand, do you feel that the mandate you've been giving is a poison chalice? How will you be able to take on and resolve these challenges? Answer, thank you very much for the question. I'd like to first say a few words. This is the first time I can speak as Minister of Defense. First of all, I'm very honored that the Prime Minister asked me to take on this role. I will be ensuring that the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces continue to be well respected as they already are around the world. This is so important for me. This is an important institution in our country, and our Canadian Armed Forces members are devoting their lives to protecting our country and our citizens. They are asking us to allow them to do their work in a safe, healthy environment. The question, I believe, is a good question. I've just been sworn in as the Minister of National Defense. I haven't yet even been to my new office or to the information sessions. So these are all questions that I will be eager to answer in the days to come. But first, I'd just like to say that as you saw with the vaccine file, I'm a very determined person. I work very hard, and I am focused on results. Those are qualities that I will be bringing to this mandate. Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Reevely from The Logic, and I have actually two questions for Mr. Rodriguez. The first one, I think, could you say clearly whether you're going to rework Bill C-10 to present a different bill to the Commons?
Well, what I'm saying is that we promised to bring some bills very quickly. C-10 is one of them. Why? Because it's fundamental. It predates the internet, and there's different set of rules, right? So one for our own media, and the other one's for the web giants, and we have to have the same set of rules for everyone. Now, I'm going to take a look at that. I'm going to be consulting, but the basis for the bill has to be to make sure that those web giants, they contribute to our culture like our own companies do. And that's fundamental. But at the same time, as I said it before, freedom of speech is fundamental too. So we're working with that.
My second question, your government has been consulting on fairly detailed proposals for addressing online harms, from illegal pornography to promoting hate speech. And the proposals have been roundly condemned, including internationally, as some of the worst ideas plucked from around the world. What are your priorities when it comes to crafting that legislation?
To listen and to consult. That's what I'm going to be doing starting tomorrow. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Will you be reworking those proposals?
I'll be consulting, that's for sure.
Question one, mic one, sorry.
Ashley Burke, CBC News. My first question is for Minister Anand and then Minister Fraser. As Canada's second female defense minister, how do you plan to do things differently? And as well, how do you plan to restore morale and confidence in a national security institution that's been so badly discredited during the sexual misconduct crisis? And by your estimation, what do you think is at the core of that crisis?
Okay, beaucoup de questions là, Ashley. So let me just say that I'm honored that the Prime Minister has asked me to take on this role as a woman, as a visible minority, and as a minister that has led the largest inoculation campaign, or at least the procurement of those vaccines in Canadian history. But I want to say that I bring those qualities to bear to this role. And the fact that I'm a woman is, I guess, one aspect of that calculation, but there are other areas of expertise that I will also be imparting to my role, including my expertise in governance and my knowledge of law and process. And those are very important qualities, I think, in any job, but certainly in the task before us at DND. In terms of moving to your next question, I will say that my top priority is to make sure that everyone in the armed forces feels safe and protected, and that they have the supports that they need when they need them, and the structures in place to ensure that justice is served. And that includes ensuring mental health supports that are easily accessible. I want to be clear that our members of the Canadian Armed Forces dedicate their lives to safeguarding our country and our citizens, and we owe it to them to make sure that they operate in a safe and healthy environment. There is no doubt in my mind that this is a task that we can accomplish, but we need to make sure that we are collaborative, we are working together, and we recognize the value and the importance of the Canadian Armed Forces as an institution in this country. Thank you.
And Minister Fraser, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has apologized to Afghans after inadvertently leaking the names of several hundred people seeking to escape the Taliban, a leak which could compromise their safety. This is not the first time the IRCC's emails have leaked people's identities. What do you think of that, and what are you going to do about it specifically?
Well, look, the starting point when we're dealing with this issue is that we've made a commitment to bring 40,000 refugees from Afghanistan to Canada. Obviously, we have a lengthy history in the country, and we want to make sure that we do right by Afghanistan, the Afghanis that we seek to bring here. The processes through which we identify the people to bring to Canada are going to need a lot of work in the days ahead. This has not been a lengthy period of time that the government has been working on this. It's been really a matter of months to make sure that we have a process in place that's going to protect the information of people while we sort of balance that against the need to get people here expeditiously so we can protect their safety is something that I very much look forward to sitting down with the department in the hours ahead to make sure that we start developing that plan right away. Of course, to the extent that there have already been information that's been compromised, it's something that I'm going to look at with the department when I meet with them immediately following this press conference, and I'll look forward to having further, more detailed discussions with you perhaps once I've had that opportunity. Thank you.
We'll take one last question at mic 2.
Yeah, my question is for Minister Anand. Minister, I'm wondering, I know you've only been in the job for a few hours, but I'm wondering what you make of the current leadership of the military, of the situation with the Chief of Defense Staff. Do you have confidence in the acting chief? How do you feel you're going to resolve this issue?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned, I've just been sworn in as the Minister of National Defence. I haven't been to headquarters, and I haven't had one briefing. I will be starting that work as soon as this press avail is over. These are excellent questions. I look forward to responding to you in a very forthright manner and way in the next few days. But I just want you to have a sense of what my approach will be, and at least that will provide a partial answer to your question at this early juncture. First of all, I want you to know that I'm going to be reviewing everything. I'm going to be reading the past reports regarding misconduct in the armed forces, as well as the recent independent review of the military justice system. I will be asking the department for an analysis of the recommendations that have already been implemented, as well as the ones that have not been. And I also hope to hear from as many of our women and men in uniform as possible, and I plan to be consulting directly with them across the country. Madame Justice Aubour is currently working on a comprehensive review of current policies, practices, and cultures in the CAF, as you know, and I want to make sure that when the report is ready, we are ready to act on it swiftly. That said, I think it is important to remember that there is no one magic solution for this issue. There is no one switch that we can turn on to change everything overnight. This is going to take time, and while that may frustrate some, I want to assure everyone that I will put in the necessary work for as long as it takes to get this done. As I have said, I am thorough, I am determined, I am dogged, and I am results-oriented, and I will be dedicating all of my energies towards this task and this position. Thank you.
Minister, just one follow-up. You mentioned, your expertise in law and governance. And those issues, do you think the military justice system should be prosecuting sexual assault cases, or should that be handled by the criminal justice system outside of that?
Well, thank you for that excellent question, and it is certainly a question that I have given much thought to over the last weeks and months. But it would be imprudent for me to opine on that question at the current time, given that I have not met with the department at all, nor any of the staff or my team, or even attended headquarters. So you'll have to give me a little bit of time to get briefed and to ensure that what I say to the Canadian public is in fact what I believe and what is necessary for reform to occur. Thank you.
Thank you, new Minister. This is all for us for Group 2. Heads up for Group 3.
Whatever.
All right, we'll start at mic 1.
Hi, Minister Bennett. Both of these questions are for you. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You're going to be tasked with creating a new mental health care transfer. Do you think there should be strings attached to this funding, or do you think provinces should be able to spend this money as they see fit to their own systems?
Well, again, firstly, as we gather here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people, I wanted to say that all of these kinds of decisions are part of a strategy, and that we will work with the Minister of Health and with the Minister of Finance, but there is a definite understanding by Canadians that when the federal government sends money, that they expect it to be spent on what it was intended for, and that is the only way we're going to build a mental health strategy.
As a follow-up, I'd like to ask you, there were, as you know, calls for you not to remain as Crown Indigenous Affairs Minister. There were issues raised with your handling of the files, the text you sent to Jody Wilson-Raybould earlier. Now that you are in a new post, any reflection, anything you wish you had done differently, any regrets in your old role?
I have to say that that I am extraordinarily proud of what we've been able to do as a government on the journey of reconciliation. And from closing gaps to righting wrongs to being able to accelerate the path to self-determination, this has been an extraordinary journey in which the TRC calls to action across all government departments. We've all worked together on that, as well as the inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and the National Action Plan. I'm just very proud of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners that have taught us all so much, not only ourselves as government, but all Canadians, and such that the importance of reconciliation coast to coast to coast has never been higher. And we've got tons more work to do, and I will continue in my new portfolio.
Thank you, Mike, too.
Hi, Tessie Sanchi, Hill Times Research. I cover health, so my questions are for Ministers Bennett and Duclos. Ministers, what were you told about the division, about the reasons for the division of the health portfolio? And what does that mean for policy files? Aside from mental health and addictions, who's taking the lead on what? Can you give me some idea of that?
Well, thank you very much. And as you did indicate, or at least suggested, this is a great privilege for me to be working with a distinguished doctor and politician like Minister Bennett. I have a lot to learn from her, and we will be working together closely on matters of physical and mental health, because we know obviously there are strong connections between the two, and we look forward to further news on that matter.
Can you tell me anything about the division of policy files? I think possibly people are speculating that, especially with COVID still being such a big situation, maybe one of the ministers is a COVID minister and the other one is looking at other policy files. Any clarification on that?
Well, two things on this. First, there will be mandate letters that will be communicated. As we know, since 2015, these letters are public, which will make things very clear and transparent at the same time. And second, on COVID-19 and other things, mental health and physical health are obviously strongly connected. We've seen the damages and the ruptures, the severe trauma that people live in their physical bodies and in their minds as well, and that's why our close relationship will be so important.
Yes, a lot of people, I think, have seen that mental health has become a parallel pandemic, and that we actually need to really dive in and make sure that there's a mental health strategy across all government departments, but also with the provinces and the territories, and for us to make sure that the stigma is gone, that the idea that mental health is health, and you know, for me, it's something that I think I felt that I was sort of doing off the side of my desk for a very long time, and now we get to really actually make the connection with Canadians that for this area that affects really every single family in this country.
Back to Mike 1.
Good afternoon, David Baxter with Global News. This first question is for Minister LeBlanc. Have Premier Kenney saying that the success of the equalization referendum gives him a clear mandate to open up negotiations with the feds on that file. What's your position on opening up talks with Alberta on equalization?
I think Premier Kenney knows very well that changing the equalization formula is a constitutional conversation. Canadians want their governments to focus collaboratively on working together in the fight against COVID-19. That's something I've had the privilege to do with Mr. Kenney and his government in the past as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. I look forward to doing that work. the Premier decided to ask a non-binding question on a municipal election in Alberta about an equalization formula of which he was one of the authors when he was a minister in Mr. Harper's government. So I think maybe you should ask him what he thought could be achieved by that particular referendum question.
Thank you. And my second question is for Minister Wilkinson. Your predecessor, Minister Reagan, previously has talked about, the move to net zero, not necessarily meaning an end of fossil fuels, looking at more of, carbon offsets, things like that as we move forward. Just, given your previous 10 years environment minister, what's your position on the future of fossil fuels in Canada's energy mix?
Excuse me. So, I am particularly focused, as I was in my previous portfolio, on finding pathways to reduce emissions across all sectors of the economy in a manner that is consistent with the pursuit and the achievement of economic opportunity. And so oil and gas is one of the areas where we clearly need to see significant reductions in the emissions that are associated with that. It's the largest single source of emissions in this country. But there are pathways. There are economic pathways. I came from the clean tech sector. I worked for almost 20 years as a CEO in the clean tech sector working on these issues. And I think that those are the kinds of conversations that we're going to want to have with the energy sector, but also with other sectors across the county.
Back to Mike 2.
Hi there. My first question is for Minister Bennett. In July, former staffers came forward alleging your office was a toxic workplace and that there were complaints that were ignored or never acted upon. What do you, the new Minister for Mental Health, say to staffers who feel like you might not be the best person to take on this big new role?
I believe that everyone deserves a safe and healthy workplace, and I believe that there are absolutely clear ways of reporting or coming forward with in any situation where somebody doesn't feel safe, and we have those in place. And I think that I have always taken that very seriously, and I am absolutely confident that we can go forward with colleagues going forward across all of government. This is hugely important to our government.
Great. And my next question is for Minister Duclos. You're taking over the health portfolio. Obviously, the last 2 years has really been focused on COVID-19. We're still not out of this pandemic. We're seeing provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta with COVID cases rising, ICU cases rising as well. However, here in Ontario, restrictions are loosened, and by March, they're hoping to have all restrictions completely eased. I'm wondering what your priorities will be in this position, and do you think that we're in a spot in Canada to be fully relaxing our restrictions at this point?
Well, my priorities will be, A, to exit definitively from COVID-19, obviously working in collaboration and in support to provinces and territories. B, to build back better our system, which did have failures before COVID-19, but the failures that we had identified before COVID-19 became even more visible and problematic during COVID-19, then to protect ourselves against the risk of any future or other aspects, other waves of COVID-19 or other pandemics, and then finally working towards a healthcare system that is equitable, efficient in the longer term. And obviously, again, this is involving a strong level of collaboration and success with provinces and territories.
We'll take one last question from Mike 2.
Juliana Pointe, Radio-Canada. Monsieur Duclos.
A question from Radio-Canada. This question is also for Mr. Duclos. The Legault government says that it does not want any conditions attached to health care transfers. How do you see your role in this context, and what will your approach be with the Quebec government? Answer. My approach will be the one that the Prime Minister summarized earlier today, one of respect and collaboration. It's also a respect that is results-oriented. We share the goals of the Quebec government and other governments as well. We're serving the same people, and we have the same goals. Follow-up question for Mr. Wilkinson. You're no longer at the environment. Do you still intend to play a role in fighting climate change, perhaps in collaboration with your colleague, Minister Guilbeault, or specifically in the West, where people might be less favorable to this, fighting this fight? Answer. Minister Guilbeault and I worked together over the 2 years that have just wrapped up, and in the future we'll continue to work together, especially in these 2 positions that we have now as new ministers. I believe that we have the same targets, that is, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to meet our targets, and at the same time, have a strong economy. I will be working with industry in the west of Canada, but I'll be working with industry across Canada as well. And I'll be delighted to be working with Mr. Guilbeault on this issue.
Je voulais que vous ayez fini au moins pour comme parler à il faut qu'on ait une reste 2 groupes, on est là. Je suis quand même en temps.
Okay. Perfect. All right, we'll start with mic 1.
Mackenzie Gray from CTV News. Minister Sajjan, my first question is for you. Do you think your removal as defense minister is admission that the government has not been able to properly handle the issue of sexual misconduct in the military?
First of all, when our government came into power, one of the most important things that we did was we wanted to make sure that we looked after the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces and their families. And this is why we brought in a defense policy that put them first. And in chapter number 1 of our defense policy, it puts them first. We know that there's a lot more work to do, but we're very proud of the work that has been started. And I know that with the tremendous leadership under Minister Nunn, she's going to be able to continue that work.
My follow-up question is for Minister Hajdu, actually. Minister, I know you're new in the file, and we've already heard from a number of other ministers that they don't know some questions, but you've got a big decision coming up, or at least part of a big decision on Friday, as to whether the federal government can continue with the appeal in the child welfare case with First Nations kids. Why is the government not come out and made a clear decision when reconciliation is a key key issue that the Prime Minister's brought forward, and that it is unanimous across the board from every First Nation and major leaders that the government should not appeal this case?
Well, first of all, let me just say what a joy it is to be here today with you on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. And I do want to thank Minister Miller for handling this file prior to me being appointed today. And I do think that we all agree that litigation isn't serving Indigenous children, but there are many important conversations to be had, and we'll be having them very quickly. I will say that, as the Prime Minister has said, that compensation is important, but ensuring that Indigenous children have equity in services and opportunities like every other child across this country is extremely important as well. And I'll be looking forward to doing that work with my colleagues.
Thank you. Micro numéro 2.
Oui, bonjour pour Madame Joly.
A question for Madame Joly. Ms. Joly, there are many people who think that you've won the jackpot today. How is it that you've risen so quickly? Answer. This isn't a question that I should be asked. It's a question you should ask of the Prime Minister. If you're asking what the vision for foreign affairs is, well, certainly I'll have the pleasure of working with one of the best, if not the best, diplomatic corps in the world. I will be greatly inspired by what Lester B. Pearson said. Through its power of influence, its strong power of influence, Canada can play a role among the great nations of the world. Our goal is to have a foreign affairs approach that will be daring yet humble. Question. You were able to, or rather your predecessor took care of the 2 Michaels in China. What will be your biggest challenge then as a foreign affairs minister? Answer. There will be several. I will quote Lester B. Pearson, who was asked the same question by journalists. He said, I'll tell you at the end of the year, because there are events happening around the world, so it's a mystery for now. But I'd particularly like to thank Mr. Marc Garneau, my colleague, who is a friend. I'd like to thank him for his work on so many different subjects, and in particular, for bringing home the 2 Michaels to Canada. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Barton and the entire team that worked to bring them home. It was truly important, essential to bring them home. Thank you.
Karaman Williams, the Globe and Mail. My first question is for Minister Sajjan. You're no longer the Minister of National Defence, so I'm wondering, looking back now at your time in that ministry, is there anything that you wish you'd done differently?
Thank you very much for the question. I think there isn't a position that I've held left where you're fully content with it. And but one of the things I want to say is the greatest honor for me, somebody who served as a private in the Army Reserve, started as a private, when it became to command a regiment, and then have the absolute honor to serve as Minister of National Defence. It's one of the things that was very important to me, and I know from our government, is to put the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces first, and especially their families. They sacrifice for us every single day, whether it's on training exercises, and we've seen the tragedies that the sacrifice that they've made from that, or on operations. And right now, the Canadian Armed Forces are serving Canadians, whether from vaccine supporting Saskatchewan, Alberta in the pandemic, and even most recently in Afghanistan. And as we work towards getting that culture change, we wish that we can have it overnight. It doesn't happen overnight, but the steady work that needs to continue and the focus on it, our government has been absolutely committed to it. And I know that with the tremendous leadership under Minister Anand, that work will continue in the service of our women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you. And my next question is for Minister Joly. As you get started on your work as the Minister of Foreign Affairs, which is a big portfolio, do you have 1 or 2 key specific things that will be your priorities, particularly with the G20 in mind?
Well, obviously the G20 is important, and lots has happened over the past couple months, including making sure that we're getting out of the pandemic, that we embrace this important economic recovery, and fighting climate change and social inclusion. That being said, this is my first day. I've been just sworn in. And I would like to suggest that Lester B. Pearson once said that Canada is able to play such a big role on the international stage because it punches over its weight. And of course, the world has changed since Lester B. Pearson, but the vision that we will have at Global Affairs is one that takes into account that very strategic work that Canada is doing across the world, and it will be a mix of humility and audacity. Thank you.
We'll go back to Mike 2.
Minister Sajjan, Ashley Burke, CBC News. What do you see as your legacy during your time in office as the Minister of Defence, and has that somehow been overshadowed by the sexual misconduct crisis?
First of all, as I said, it has been a tremendous honor for me to be in this role. And just to be in cabinet is a privilege unto its own. But for anybody who has served in uniform, to go on and become Minister of Defence and to serve the women and men is a great honor. In regardless of what the difficulties, the challenges that we see in the Canadian Armed Forces, this is not about my legacy. This is about serving the women and men in the Canadian Armed Forces who do extraordinary things for us every single day. Some get reported that we can, but most don't. And I wish I could share those things. And this is why it was so important for me when I was coming in as Minister of Defence, of making sure that we create an environment so that anybody who joined the Canadian Armed Forces, that they can reach their full potential. Because ultimately, our Canadian Armed Forces benefits, our allies benefit, and the world benefits as well. And you see that every single day. In terms of the, probably one of the biggest things that we did in defense very early on was a fully costed and funded defense policy so that the military can actually plan for the future for 20 years out. A 70% increase in defense investment, every service, including the special forces, being re-equipped. But more importantly, as we talk about procurement, probably one of the biggest things for us was putting our members first and their families. Like relocation. It is so difficult when families have to relocate. And the reason I'm sharing some of those, the smaller things that don't make it out into the media is because it matters to people. We deploy our troops all over the world. We're proud to say that every international operation, our troops, when they deploy, it'll be tax-free for them. That says a thank you for all the people that they're leaving behind. So that culture change that we have been working on from day one, shedding a light onto the problem, because until you shed a light, you can't figure out exactly what needs to happen. And so I'm very proud of the work that has begun. And I know that the work can never, we wish it could finish, but as I stated, under the tremendous leadership of Minister Anand, who has tremendous professional experience to bring to this table, I know that work is going to continue in a much faster way.
And Minister Heidi, my next question's for you. After being the health minister, how do you see this new role? Do you see it more as a lateral move, or a demotion given your prominent role during the pandemic? And how do you feel about this new file?
Well, first I should start with saying that I have 12 First Nations in my own riding, and I have worked extensively with Indigenous people throughout my previous career, prior to politics, and certainly as a politician had the opportunity to work on the early consultations on the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's Inquiry, increasing Indigenous skills and education training funding so that it was equitable with non-Indigenous skills training funding. And so I consider this a huge honor to serve Indigenous people of our country and to work with Indigenous communities from across this country. I think it's a critical role in our government's efforts to further reconciliation. And I'm just thrilled to be able to serve my country and Indigenous people in this way. Thank you.
We'll take one last question at mic 1.
Oui. Bonjour, Marco Belair-Cirneau.
A question from Le Devoir newspaper. My question is for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Ms. Jolie, will China face reprisals from Canada for having withheld and imprisoned 2 Canadians for nearly 3 years? Answer: well, beyond the question of China and the 2 Michaels, of course, I just earlier thanked the entire team that made it possible to bring these 2 extremely important Canadians home. They stayed in China for too long. I'd like to thank Marc Garneau, as well as Ambassador Barton and the entire team. That was a big priority in the last years. I will have the chance to meet the top experts on China in the world, especially from the Canadian perspective, since I'll be meeting the Canadian Diplomatic Corps very soon. I can tell you, however, that we have no illusions. Our eyes will be wide open. Follow-up question. Your predecessor, Marc Garneau, Well, would he make a good ambassador to Canada in Paris? Answer, I'd say that Mark is good in everything he undertakes. He's a good friend, a colleague. He's an MP for Montreal. I've known him a long time. It's always an honor to be working with him, especially since he was the first Canadian astronaut. And I'll be delighted to continue working with him in the Quebec caucus and the National caucus. Thank you very much.
Heads up for the last group.
You guys are strong. Bonjour, bonjour.
On est quoi, 6? Pas d'un bord, 3 d'autres?
Thank you for being there so late.
All right, starting with mic 2 here.
Hi, it's David Reevely from The Logic, and I have 2 questions for Minister Champagne. The first one is about consumer privacy legislation. Your government's last attempt at updating the old law stalled in the House. Will you be reworking that legislation in response to some of the complaints that it's a step back from the 20-year-old law that we have now?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm very pleased, like all of my colleagues, that the Prime Minister has asked us to serve in our respective capacities. Obviously, consumer protection is top of mind as competition in this country. As we have this new mandate, we'll be looking at all the appropriate measures we can put in place. But certainly, we have seen trends, we have seen developments that requires me and my team, obviously, to look at these issues. And you can count on us to focus on consumer, on competition, on making sure that within our countries, we have the set of rules and the enforcements that goes with it in order to protect adequately, I would say, consumers across our nation.
So will there be another bill?
You would probably expect that 5 hours or so after being sworn in, it would be a bit quick for any minister to pretend that new legislation would be brought forward. But one thing I can say to Canadians who are watching is that it is the role of this government, and any government, I would say, to make sure that we always have the right framework for competition and the right framework to protect consumers. And that's certainly going to be top of mind as we look forward in the coming months. Merci.
Merci. Micro numéro 1.
Bonjour.
A question from Le Devoir. The question is again for Minister Champagne. You were Minister of Foreign Affairs. We now have a new Minister of Foreign Affairs. What advice would you give to Ms. Joly to stay in Foreign Affairs? We now have a new Minister of Foreign Affairs. What advice would you give to Ms. Joly to stay in the position in the long term? Answer. I wouldn't say I necessarily have any advice to give to Ms. Joly. I think the job of the Minister of Foreign Affairs is an important job. Canada's voice is heard around the world. I saw that when I myself was Minister of Foreign Affairs. Minister Garneau noted that as well. Ms. Joly will see this, and we'll always be here as colleagues to support her in this role. I think that at this critical junction, when we're still facing COVID issues, as well as economic issues in several parts of the world, I think it's important for Canada to have a strong voice. And I'm sure that Ms. Joly will be able to carry Canada's voice to all international tables that Canada is a part of. It's important that Canada's voice be heard. And we saw that in the last months. International cooperation was essential to face the issues that we're currently facing. There's two major ones right now, COVID-19 and climate change. COP26 is soon to be held. Canada will be heard, and I think that the world would like to see Canada playing a leadership role on the international stage. Thank you. My follow-up question is for Ms. Leboutillier. You're once again Minister of National Revenue. You've said you want to close tax loopholes and shut down tax shelters. How long will this take, do you think? Answer. You're so right. It's important to continue to work on anything that has to do with tax loopholes. It's also important to work closely with the Minister of Finance so that we have very clear rules and we're able to continue to do our work at the Canada Revenue Agency. We need to ensure that there are strategies in place to make sure that people pay their fair share.
Tessie Sanchi, I cover health for Hill Times Publishing. My question is for Minister Champagne. Minister, when you launched the biomanufacturing strategy in July, you told the pharmaceutical sector that you've heard them. They have their issues with pharmaceutical regulation in this country. And you also said that you and the health minister would engage in discussions. Now that you are returning to the file, what can you tell the sector about those discussions? Will formal consultations take place?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the question. I think you were right. One of the first things we did as we saw the COVID pandemic, you saw in March 2020, when it was declared a pandemic, we invested close to $1 billion to rebuild the biomanufacturing sector in the country because we understood, and Canadians have asked us to be more resilient. Actually, what we saw in Canada and what we saw in many Western countries is that we really need to onshore productions of a lot of essential goods. I often said that you saw supply chain going from global to regional and more emphasis put on resiliency and efficiency. So we did invest, and you saw some key investment. We were able to attract Moderna in our country to have mRNA capacity in the country. Actually, we have Medicago in Quebec City. We saw Sanofi investing. And I will continue to make sure that we onshore as much as possible of the biomanufacturing capacity in the country. I've been talking to about almost all CEOs in the country which want to increase production in Canada. Certainly that work will continue with Minister Duclos, because one thing that we have learned from this pandemic is that we need to look forward and be better prepared whatever may come next. That's what Canadians expect. That's what we are committed to do. And that's what we have already started to do because we have been able to attract some key investments that will make Canada more resilient in the future.
My second question is also for you. Going back to those discussions, one of the sector's major complaint, one of them is drug pricing regulations. I do understand it's a Health Canada file. However, you want to encourage companies to set up shop in Canada. Do you plan on engaging in those discussions on the PMPRB regulations?
Well, I'm always wanting to engage with CEO. Actually, that's part of the reason why we've been able to land that number of investments. I mean, we said from the get-go that we had seen manufacturing leaving the country over the last 3-4 decades, and in a matter of months, we have been able to rebuild significant capacity in the country. And certainly we'll be continuing to engage with CEOs and leaders in the industry. And I've always said my door is open, because we want to make sure that we work collaboratively with the industry. We know that the health sciences and life sciences industry is one where you have a lot of science, innovation, and technology. And we want Canada to be at the forefront, and we want Canada to be leading in the world, to continue to be attracting. We have the talent, we have the ecosystem, we have the research ecosystem in Canada to attract. I think we have become a very attractive jurisdiction, and I'll be happy to engage with them to see what more we can do to attract more investment, create jobs in this country, and make Canada more resilient to face whatever may come next.
Thank you. We'll go back to mic 1.
Hi, Chris Rand, CBC. 2 quick ones for Mr. Holland, if you would. Come on down. The first one is Parliament comes back November 22nd. We've got till December 17th before the winter break. Do you see that your government can put forward some COVID legislation and move it through to the Senate in a 3-week period?
Well, it's premature to talk what exactly is going to be part of the agenda. Let me say that I am a firm believer in cooperation, that my first move is going to be to talk with my counterparts in other parties to say that there are clear and pressing priorities, and certainly, as you mentioned, ending COVID-19 and making sure that we do everything together to do that, to get it done. So I can't say exactly what that's going to entail, because there's a lot of discussions that have to happen. We're at day 0 right now, but obviously this is going to be a top priority.
And my follow-up is, there's an unknown amount of the Conservative caucus who are unvaccinated or won't declare the vaccination status, and there's that one Liberal MP who has the medical issue who's not fully vaccinated. So how do you see Parliament returning? Do you see at this point a virtual mixed thing, or do you see it as being only the people who are double vaccinated can come and attend Parliament?
Well, there's 2 issues there. So let's take the first issue, which is vaccinations. I think Canadians were preeminently clear that they have an expectation that workplaces be vaccinated. You know, if we just walk down the street here and try to go to a restaurant, we've got to be vaccinated. Let's remember with the Conservatives, they were against a hybrid model in the beginning, and then they became for it. They were against digital voting, then they were for it. This is a preeminently reasonable thing. I've really been impressed at the Board of Internal Economy, the body which governs these matters, how we've been able in COVID to put aside some of these more partisan concerns and really focus on public health and make good decisions. So this is so preeminently reasonable that I think at the end of the day, that's going to prevail. Let me secondly say that I think a hybrid parliament has been incredibly effective, and that as we don't know how this is going to go, and we still need to maintain that flexibility as we have members who are unvaccinated, that we're going to still need those provisions over the near term, and I look forward to having conversations with my counterparts in that regard.
My question is also for you, Minister Holland. Before this election campaign, the Prime Minister said that Parliament was becoming toxic, that it was dysfunctional. After the election, really not much has changed. A lot of the same members of Parliament were re-elected. How are you going to approach negotiations and compromises with opposition parties who are frustrated that your government took them into an election? And how are you going to get them on side with your agenda, given that it is crucial to have them, otherwise we're at risk of going to another election again?
Well, thank you for the question. Look, I spent a long time in opposition as a critic, and I welcome criticism. I think it's an essential part of our democracy. But that criticism needs to be constructive. And we do need to tone down the partisan nature of the aggression that we have seen. Look, it's clear Canadians have big expectations of this Parliament. They have clear things that they're looking for us to achieve, from ending COVID-19 to climate change, to affordable housing, to reconciliation of Indigenous issues. So there's so many different things that we have to come together on. I think that we all have to meet that with a spirit of cooperation and being constructive. And so that's what I'm looking forward to in my discussions as we talk about the path ahead, about working in that spirit.
Second question. I'm trying to understand. You're saying eventually Conservatives will understand the vaccination decision, but they're currently refusing the decision of the Board of Internal Economy. They want MPs to be there in person. What do you think will happen on November 22nd? Answer. Initially, the Conservative Party whip clearly said that the Conservative Party would respect the choice of the Board of Internal Economy. And then the Conservative Party's opinion changed. The Leader of the Opposition, Aaron O'Toole, said the same thing. It's important to respect the choice of the Board of Internal Economy, and now we're hearing something else from Mr. O'Toole. And yet it's very clear for public safety that vaccination is essential. Essential. For example, if I want to go to a restaurant, the same expectations are in place at the House of Commons. I think that's what Canadians believe. I hope that the Conservatives will be reasonable about this issue.
Union Group of Ministers. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci tout le monde. Glad we could be here.